Hello, everyone. Hello. We're so excited that you're here as people are entering. Hello, welcome. This is our second session, and I am so very excited about this session for Evolving Learner. This is the second part because it deserves a second part. So I am grateful. There's lots that Lainey is going to be talking about today that's going to build on our last session, but also I think take it to a new place. And there are so many fun things to discuss, and people were asking so many questions after our last session that we needed a part 2. So I will let Lainey, who is amazing, an author, a speaker, presenter, she has so much goodness to share with us. We're lucky to have her. I will let her introduce herself to you all today. And then we will continue, and Shannon and I will be here and pop in as is needed to continue the conversation. So thank you so much, Lainey, for being here, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. So I'm going to have my slides locked and loaded whenever we're ready to go with that. That's cool. So I'm Lainey Rowell. I've been in education for 23 years. And let me see, author, podcaster, just love working with my peers, love working with learners of all ages. And I'm excited to share some stuff. So last time we talked about building community, and this is definitely building on that. This one's going to be more about inquiry. So I think I'll just go ahead and get started. So just a real quick, you can catch me on the socials. Everything is at Lainey Rowell. I'm on Twitter, Insta, and LinkedIn. If you go to Insta, you will see some personal stuff. So if you don't mind seeing children, then that's cool too. But the Twitter is 100% professional, so is the LinkedIn. So also the slides will make those available to you. I've got a bit.ly for that, and pretty much everything I share is usually found on my website, LaineyRowell.com. And we've got a website for the book, evolvinglearner.org. And then the podcast, you can find it just anywhere you listen to podcasts, but you can also go to lemonadelearning.us. And that's with Bree Hodges. So excited to share some of this. I'm going to bring Steph and Shannon back in a little bit because I want to hear some of their thoughts on some of the things that we're going to share. But yep, I'm an evolving learner with a lifetime guarantee, and let's get going. So first, I always start off, whenever I get to work with educators, I just want to always start off by saying thank you. Thank you for being educators. Thank you for continuing to be educators in this crazy cuckoo bananas time. We appreciate you very much. And then thank you for being here just to engage in this. And I'm excited to hear what folks have to say about it. So I always start with the 5-2-5 breathing. And so I'm going to go ahead and do this where I'm going to breathe in deeply for 5, hold for 2, and then breathe out deeply for 5 seconds. I think this is just a good mindfulness practice to get kind of like we're all rushing from meeting to meeting, whether it's via Zoom, wherever we're holding class, we're kind of jumping between a lot of stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and do this right now. So in for 5. All right, I'm ready to move. So, Steph, you were so nice to talk about the book Evolving Learner. And really, these are the big themes in Evolving Learner. And I'm just kind of sharing this ahead of time because it really feeds into what I'm going to be talking about with inquiry. And so that was definitely something that it is woven. I actually did not know going into it with my co-authors, Christy Andre and Lauren Steinman, that we were going to spend so much time focusing on cycles of inquiry, but as we were learning through writing the book, and that was the whole idea, was us to learn while we wrote this book, that just became so important that it was all about a cycle of inquiry, having that focus, learning, refining, and reflecting. And so we know that that's critical for improving our practice. And then there's a huge element of social emotional learning. That's really important to all three of us. And so it ended up just naturally occurring as a theme throughout the entire book. And then, kind of the big idea going into writing the book was how we need to be continuously improving through learning from kids, peers, and the world. And so just wanted to kind of share that. And for those who are up for it, I would love it if you would just in your chat space, if you want to just share, like, what is your problem of practice? Because that's an important part in a cycle of inquiry is what are we going to focus on? So what is your focus right now? If you're willing to share that, that would be amazing. And you can share it now or at any point in our chat today. And so I already mentioned this cycle of inquiry: focus, learn, refine, reflect. And if you have other cycles of inquiry that you're interested in, if you take it and kind of do a crosswalk, you'll see that those words that are really powerful in cycles of inquiry, we haven't like reinvented a cycle of inquiry. This is just kind of our way of taking all of these models that we know, like the 5 E's, and really trying to kind of find a way to bring them all together, whether it's for adult learning or for learning with our students. And so this is what we came up with for our Evolving Learner Cycle of Inquiry. And I mentioned this in the first one, but I just wanted to revisit it. I'm going to do it pretty quickly. And that is, who works the hardest in this classroom? And so I know we're in a different state right now where classrooms might be through screens, and it might be virtual, it might be simulcast, it might be a lot of different scenarios. But you could even think back to pre-COVID and what it would look like when you walked into maybe someone else's classroom or your classroom. And I get this question from my mentor, Alan November, and he's asked this to probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of teachers. And the overwhelming response is that most people feel like the teacher works the hardest. So we want to move away from that. We want to move from teacher-driven to learner-driven. That's what's really important. And so, oh yeah, thank you. I do think it's really important finding that focus. So we're going to talk about how we can draw kids in as owners of the learners. And I have more slides for those of you that might have actually popped in. I don't know if we shared that yet, the link to the slides, but if you pop in, this is actually a bigger slide deck. I'm kind of trying to keep my pace here, not just for energy reasons, but because I really want to bring Steph and Shannon in a couple of minutes. And so all of this is for anyone to come back and check it out. But really, the big idea is we want to be continuously improving. We want our learners continuously improving, and we need to draw them in rather than passive observers in their own education. We want them being engaged. We want to build creativity and collaboration, and that's all going to lead to deeper learning. So, and I know I shared this at the last one, and I still don't love this on a slide deck, but this is just a graphic that's really important to me, coming from my background of online teaching. And so this idea of community of inquiry, the social presence, this interpersonal, we're working together, we're learning together, we're building relationships, this teaching presence. I'm here for you, the individual, I'm here for the teams, I'm here for everyone. And then that cognitive presence where it's like we're all working together to construct meaningful, sustained communication and understanding of the content. So that's kind of just some research to back up some of the things I'm going to talk about and that I did talk about in the previous session. And then I shared this before too, equifinality, like my favorite word, just because I think this is what education's all about. We can all have really, really good results, but we don't have to do it the exact same way to get there. I think there's some really key components. I think we do need to build relationships. I think we definitely need to be designing in ways that are engaging and encouraging inquiry. But how exactly we do that can definitely be different from teacher to teacher. So love that word, equifinality. And a nod to my friend, Dr. Katie Novak, firm goals, flexible means. She says it all the time. It's always a really good reminder to me. And so to me, that's kind of the maybe less $5 word way of saying equifinality. Firm goals, flexible means. We don't all have to do it the same way. We just know where we're going to get there. And then we're talking about inquiry today. And so really for inquiry, we need it to be learner driven, not 100% of the time. And this is like kind of sometimes people see this as an edgy slide, like where should we be? And it's not meant to be edgy necessarily. It's just meant to be reflective. Like, I think we can all agree we don't want to be 100% teacher driven. And then we also understand that things like direct instruction are important, but I think we need to challenge ourselves and be thinking about how do we get to that more 100% learner driven. And so that's really important. So I have a question for all of you as we get into this, where we're going to talk about learning design and designing for inquiry. I would love it if people wanted to share, like, how do you learn from kids? This is something I'm super passionate about. So I always love to hear how other people even interpret that question and then want to answer it in a certain way. So I'd love to hear about that. I'm actually going to jump a little bit more. I'll come back to that. That was something I meant to hide a little bit earlier. I must have missed that, but that's part of those bonus slides. And so for those of you that have not seen the Esther Park breakout rooms, you're going to love it. It's great. And we can come back to that in a little bit. But I really wanted to talk about the 5 E's and how I have kind of adapted it for our current circumstances. Because it honestly, in my pre-COVID life, a lot of what I designed was definitely 5 E's. And it really still is 5 E's, where we move that direct instruction back. But I'm not articulating it as 5 E's. I'm articulating it a little bit different way. And so just sharing this as a bonus, because I do have a template if anyone's interested, with not only the stages of the 5 E's, but also on the right tips for how you can do each element of that. But again, I'm actually going to jump to another slide here. Thank you. So we have the 5 E's, which is inquiry-based, but in my articulating to my learners, I want it to be a little tighter, a little more concise. And so I'm actually articulating it as the 3 D's. And so discover, discuss, and demonstrate. And so I'm going to grab Shannon and Steph and ask them to come in and chat with me about this, because this is still the 5 E's. Thank you, Shannon and Steph, for being here. I'm roping them in. I'm like, come on. No, they're really generous and they're happy to be here. So thank you for joining me. So ladies, are you good with, if I kind of go through these D's, can we kind of chat about like what this might mean in your teaching circumstance and maybe what you think other people would do? All right. So this is just a crosswalk. You know, the 5 E's are down below. Sometimes when people see the 5 E's, they're always thinking evaluate is last, but actually evaluate should be throughout, if at all possible. Also, cycles of inquiry aren't actually meant to be linear. I know I'm a very like A to B, like I like to go the straight, and it's actually not how a cycle inquiry is supposed to be. So you can move back and forth, but I have to, can I make the announcement, Steph?
Do it. Yeah.
So a lot of this will not be a surprise to Steph, because so she was at a session with me. We did a leadership summit together, and she joined one of my sessions, and we connected afterwards, and we were just like having all this rich conversation. And I said, hey, would you write an article with me? Because you have so many good ideas of how this would look in the classroom. So Steph was super, super generous, and she was willing to write with me. And so we have this article we wrote together where we took the 3 D's, discover, discuss, demonstrate, and we talk about how we can do it in the classroom. So I just kind of thought we would go through and share some ideas. Sound good? Shannon, I'm going to come to you real quick. So, all right. So I love it when I do that. That's linked, so that's why I did that. All right, so the discover part, and this is where your hook's going to be. This is where you're going to get them, right? This is where you want to really make it super engaging. You want to design with empathy. And this is the really important part for me. All that's really important, but like not important enough without the UDL. So the UDL is really important to me. This is something I became familiar with years ago in my work in online learning and some other projects. So can y'all help me unpack this a bit? Like, what does that discover mean to you? And so Shannon, I'm going to start with you. What do you think about the discover piece? This pushing the direct instruction back and just giving them some content in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. So I primarily teach AP language and composition, which is very much all about kind of, it's not your typical English, I guess. We focus more on like rhetoric and really thinking about, you know, author choices and kind of that vein instead of the literary side of things. And so we use this quite a bit. You know, one way we need to essentially, before we can jump in, we need to kind of engage our learners' high interests. And so oftentimes what I'll do is, you know, start out with just a simple quote, perhaps from the text that we're going to really be diving into. Not give them everything all at once, but really kind of give them just a glimpse and then give them opportunity to really usually break into groups, right? Because I'm a big fan of breakout rooms and smaller group kind of engagement. And, you know, give them the chance to really dive in and break the quote down for what it is and read between the lines and think about context and make those personal, you know, kind of associations, right? We talk a lot about like we all bring backgrounds and experiences and cultures, religions to the table. And it's essential that we all use those lenses when we're really diving into something. So for us, prior to, because it's primarily a writing course, we really do start with that, like just a little like glimpse into what we're going to be focusing in on. Or, I'll use visual rhetoric to kind of spark interest and really kind of get them thinking about, what were the intentions.
I love that. So, okay, I skipped past it, and Steph, I'm gonna bug you for a question in a minute, but I skipped past it. But I did have a slide here. Before grade school, before elementary school, basically, kids average over 300 questions a day, and so it's kind of shocking to me because that just plummets, and actually the research shows that it plummets just dramatically by about fourth grade. So to do what you're doing, where you give them something, and it sounds like you're giving them an opportunity to kind of wonder about it and ask questions about it, right? And so I love that. I'm a big fan of the question formulation technique. That's why I had this in here. So
love that. Yeah, no, absolutely. And honestly, at first, when we first start out for the year, I really do guide them in that a little bit more. So I'll give them a little taste, or we'll give them sentence or question frames to get them kind of moving. And then by the time second semester rolls around, they're really, really, diving in. We do this project second semester. It's called the Heart Transplant Project, where students are essentially given, a list of 6. They're broken up into groups, giving a list of 6 hypothetical heart transplant candidates. And they have to essentially, it's a whole debate style where they have to conduct research and really build the backgrounds of each of the candidate, because they're just given the basics like name, age, and then maybe like 1 or 2 other little details. And so they really dive in and get this opportunity to discover, I don't tell them anything. So what does it mean to be a heart transplant candidate? And also, like, if they are acting as like surgeons, what do they need to know? What do they bring to the table? What kind of lens do they need to view the scenario through? And so lots of giving them just a little taste, and then giving them the agency to be able to kind of keep it going.
Wow, that's like a really interesting topic. Like, wow, very interesting, very interesting. Steph, for some reason I'm making a connection to when you talk about empathy interviews. And we talked about that during discovery too. What are some of your other thoughts about this discovery phase?
Yeah, this is probably I love all of the phases, but there is something really beautiful about the way that you begin a unit. So for me, I chair a design thinking pathway that combines English, history, and science. And I too am an English teacher, but I think that much of what Shannon's bringing in is similar in mine, in that one of the beautiful things I think about teaching English is that it is language, but through that language, you can be studying any subject, right? So really that is the power of that course. And I love that it's 9th grade. So it's really like an introductory space. So with mine being that it is a design thinking pathway and a project-based learning pathway, when we do this discover part, we usually begin, we call it the entry. And we usually begin with something at the start, whether that be, it could be a letter, it could be watching a short clip of something. It could be, as Shannon mentioned, a quote, but it usually is something that would then spark questions. So we move it from like, okay, you're going to be given, maybe it's a document, maybe it's a piece. And from that, it should have a ton in it that you're like, I have no idea what any of this stuff is. And so what we do is we move from that to then them generating what they know and understand. We call those their knows, and then a list of their need to knows, and this giant list of questions. And I would say after understanding the technique that you were talking about with questions, I think it very much aligns. There are pieces that I'm learning from there. And then figuring out from that giant list how to prioritize. It's how I know as a teacher where I might need to give workshops. But we say over and over, if you don't ask the question, I'm going to assume you already know how to do this. So if I have stuff in there and you don't ask about it, I'm going to assume, okay, great, you already know how to write a research paper. Perfect. We're going to keep going. So it then pushes them, it urges them to then ask a question. My favorite thing that we started to incorporate over the last year and a half was the empathy interview piece. Because what I realized was we called ourselves a design learning pathway, but we weren't actually design thinking pathway, but we weren't actually practicing design thinking, which is where you really have to begin in a place of empathy. And so while we were doing things that were connected to the real world and it followed a lot of the pieces, it was not rooted in empathetic listening and understanding. And so what that means is that a project is not about me. It might be that I like some aspect of it, but it is about my contribution to someone else, to something else, to the world, to something bigger than myself. So the discovery needs to be, I need to understand how to listen to what other people need, because I already know my own stuff. Yeah. I get what I think about something. I need to know what other people do. So the way that we've started to incorporate that is that we have built in either where we bring in someone, or we ask our students to then go interview people in their own lives that would have a lens on whatever it is that we're about to look at. And if we don't think that they necessarily have someone that they're connected to, we might bring someone in that they can then ask questions of. And so these are real people that then come back throughout the course of our study and are on panels. And it then allows for students to get a better understanding. As an example, last year, we did a project that was related to English and biology on genetics. And it was a unit on fertility. And we had 6 different people that we had pre-interviewed because we knew the subject was a challenging one, who were going through issues dealing with fertility, and they were willing to be someone interviewed. And the biology teacher interviewed 3, I interviewed 3. We broke the students up into different groups. They watched those. We had a few that were live, that were people from our school. The students asked them questions. At the end of that, they were asking questions about, if someone else was in your situation, what would you hope to tell them, or what would you hope that you needed in that situation? And the goal of that project was that they created something to fill that need. And so every group's project was totally different, because each person was sharing from a different place. So I think that's the piece, right? It still is getting to the content, but they're discovering it through the lens of a variety of people. And what that does as a teacher is, when we get to that end piece, because the discovery is different, we get to hear a wider breadth of understanding of a subject. It's changed my perspective on how to begin always.
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts as you're talking. I'm like taking notes. I'm like, one of the thoughts I had was, by the way, both you and Shannon, those are like intense topics. Good on you. Like, no holding back. Like, we're getting real with it. I love that. One of the things that I thought, and you saw me like jumping around because you said like video for inquiry, and that reminded me of Class Hook, which is one that I like to use a lot for inquiry, just pulling from pop culture. But another thought that I had as you're talking about like the empathy piece is that the discover can happen asynchronously, allowing kids to do it at their own pace and allowing them to really think more critically through those things that do require you to be really thoughtful to have that empathy. And so I love that. Very, very cool. I'm going to jump us to, if you guys don't mind, I'll jump us to discuss. And this is one where I tend to want to talk about, and this is just the online experience and in our current situation, where I want to also talk about synchronous and asynchronous, because, I should say all of the Ds can live in synchronous, asynchronous. They can go back and forth. I hope they do go back and forth, because when you're talking about that empathy, like I think about class discussions and when they happen synchronously or asynchronously. And when they happen synchronously, and this has been my entire teaching career, my entire 23 years in education, small or tall learners, I will ask the question and the same 3 to 4 people will raise their hand. It's always. And those are not necessarily the people who have the best answer, the most enlightened answer, the most empathetic answer. It's just the ones who are the most comfortable in that live moment sharing their thinking. And so when I became an online teacher, I fell in love with the asynchronous discussion because that's what gives everyone a voice. I get to hear from every single learner. And so I want to be thoughtful with it. I can't do it all the time. I would be buried in reading and providing quality feedback and having presence in the asynchronous discussion. But strategically, it's really important to give everyone that voice. So, and I don't want to lose the people who thrive off the immediate feedback, because there are some people who like really love to raise their hand and they start to wilt when they don't get those opportunities. So I think that's important. And just one more thing, and then I want to hear what you all have to say. It's called discuss, not direct instruction in this second D, because it doesn't need to just be direct instruction. And we want to really make sure we're doing the peer-to-peer. And I think that's one thing we've all really had to think very intentionally about in this current environment, is how do we make sure that the kids are connecting with each other, not just with me. So that's my thought on discuss. What do y'all think? Shannon, what about you?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I actually just did a whole live stream this last weekend on discussion. Discussion obviously has a place in every single classroom. And I think that as we moved virtually, it really caused some pains for a lot of educators and students alike, because they feel uncertain about the new space, right? Anytime you transition to a new space, the space being virtual classroom, it changes, and you really have to change the name of the game and the rules that you abide by. And now there's this vulnerability that exists, because if I type something in the chat, or if I unmute, or if I go to unmute and then somebody unmutes at the same time, and it's that awkward talking over each other, there's a lot of those like little moments that really matter a lot to students. You think of it as like not a big deal, but they struggle with that. And yet discussion is, in my opinion, the most important thing we can do in a classroom. In fact, most of my teaching like style is really grounded in discussion and not so much direct instruction. But I found that if we set up the parameters for students to discuss, then it makes it a little bit easier. So people who are watching probably have heard me talk about this 1,000 times, but I'm a big fan of the Waterfall Chat, where you have everybody respond in the chat, and they hold it, they don't push enter. And then finally at the end of the think time or the response time, say, give it 30, 45 seconds. You count down 3, 2, 1, everybody, respond or pushes enter, and it just kind of falls in. And what that does is that allows our students who maybe are a little bit more introverted or nervous about being right or wrong, right? It gives them a space to say, well, I don't have to compare it to anybody else's. I'm going to go ahead and share my own perspective, and it also kind of eliminates that issue of cookie cutter responses, right? In a synchronous setting. Yeah. I'm a big fan of the Zoom chat, and I know Steph is too. So, or the Google Meet chat. So I guess I'll throw it over to her and kind of maybe get some of her perspective on chat and the use of it.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking something up in a book. When you were talking about the Waterfall Chat, oh gosh, today when I was reading in Dare to Lead, Brene there was a part in it where she was talking about the flipping of writing something on a Post-it. It was like the in-person Waterfall Chat, in my opinion, right? Where you don't show it until you're all at the same time, and then everybody shares something. And that totally made me think of that. So that's what I was trying to look up. But I love this part too. I guess I love all parts of projects, but I love that in this part, I love that you called it discuss, and I love that you purposefully, when you said that you didn't call it direct instruction, because I think it builds so much on when you talked about that part of who does the most talking does the most learning. And that as I really sit with that, I need to ensure that I'm giving my students the opportunities to think for themselves and to come to their own understanding and to work through and ask questions. And that's that middle time of figuring all that out. So today, when you brought up the Esther Park piece, my last live class with students, that was our first time where we actually tried that out. And we had 2 different kinds of breakout rooms during the course. We're currently doing a service learning unit rooted in the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I've been doing this service learning unit my whole 18 years, but this is the first time that I'm rooting it in something I would say that's bigger than our local community. And so part of what's happening is students are really grappling and working through those. So they met with their specific topic groups. In those groups, they are picking the book that they wanted to read, and then they were letting us know why they wanted to read that. So they were coming back. We were talking about it in the class. So they met with a group for a specific purpose, had a talk, came back if they had questions, and then the second part was they were continuing their research. And so what we did was we actually ended up doing three spaces just for our own better clarity for our classes.
I've done that too.
I see. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I didn't even know. Okay. And so, yeah, we did the teacher room where they could get help. And then we did the open room where it was more like people who want to work while talking through, not necessarily with other people on their same topic, but they could talk about it. And then the quiet work room. And I didn't know how it was going to go, and it was great. It was really great. We asked students at the end of it, we surveyed them and asked, would you want to do that again? And they said yes. The piece that I actually really loved about it was something really small. So it allowed me as the teacher, when I was doing breakout spaces, to hold the students that I needed to check in with without forcing them to make that choice themselves. So like I said, if you need help or you have questions, stay. Like, when we were using Pear Deck and we asked them to put in where they would like to go. Honestly, in one of the periods, no students put the teacher room because they didn't think they had questions. And yet there were 4 students who hadn't turned in any article responses. Right. So we knew that, my co-teacher and I, my student teacher and I, we knew it. So we just held them. And then obviously those students were like, oh, I didn't get put anywhere. Oh, yeah, we just had a few things to check in with before we send you to that open room or the quiet room that you wanted to run. And it was a moment of epiphany for me to go, oh my gosh, that protocol just changed my ability to actually check in with them. It wasn't awkward. I didn't have to tell them anything. Other students were somewhere else.
Yep.
And, and so the discussion felt authentic. They could ask real questions, not be worried about it, and then move into wherever they needed to work. And it also gave me insight about how particular students in my class prefer working. Yep. Do you like having music on? Do you like noise? Do you like talking? Are you fine with siblings and pets in spaces? Like, you work through all that. And others who are like, no, I'd rather just be in a space, but no other people are in that space too. And it was a benefit to being virtual. I can't do that in the same way. I've tried in person, but I have to have kids in a hallway to do one thing, or in a room next door, or in a closet, right? Like, it's totally different.
And for anyone who's watching who hasn't yet seen this, I mean, I've never seen anything go bananas on Twitter like this. Like, upwards of, I know it's over 5,000 retweets already. This happened in the summer, and that's bananas. I don't think I've even things like that, the big news, like Edutopia, big people put out it. 500 or 5,000, over 5,000 retweets is pretty amazing. I will tell you, I have had the same experience where I sometimes have, I am sometimes lonely in the teacher room, and I tell them, if no one comes into the teacher room, I'm creeping in your other room. So just know that's going to maybe happen, and you're just going to ignore me, and it's going to be fine. And then sometimes if I always have an accountability piece. So if that accountability piece is not being done by the individuals, I'll go find them in whatever room they're in. If they've decided to do the quiet room, perfect. Let's talk about this. So I think that's a great strategy. And so Esther Park, I don't think you're listening right now, but wherever you are, thank you for this, because I have done online learning for a long time, but in traditional online learning, we don't do a lot of synchronous. And because we're forced for compliance issues to do all of this synchronous time in what would potentially be really valuable online learning time, we're forced into this. Gives us that choice because we have the accountability still of, we know where they were. They were with me. They just might've been in a different breakout room. So I think that's super awesome.
Before we transition away from discuss, one other thing that I was thinking about, that Steph kind of brought up, this idea of, okay, so inquiry-based learning is hard, right? Because you're giving a lot of control to the students, and at first they really do struggle with that. And I think that's one reason why discussion maybe is so challenging for, a lot of the educators at my site. This is the number one thing that they pinpoint, is that like, okay, fine, we can do the like engagement part, but when we ask our students to discuss, we go into those breakout rooms and it's just crickets. And I think sometimes we underestimate the reality of the situation, and the fact that like students sometimes don't know how to engage in discussion in an academic way. Because I pop them into rooms with questions like, what's your favorite restaurant and why? And they can talk for days, right? Or describe your most vivid memory. I have to like pull, like, okay, guys, we need to move on, But when we ask them to talk about something academic, it really is a struggle because they don't have the know-how a lot of the time. And so I think one piece that is essential is that I've really tried to do, and it sometimes gets a little annoying for them, is really modeling how that discussion goes and really thinking through. And a lot of the time, at the beginning, I teach advanced placement students, but I still give them sentence frames for discussion in the beginning, because they need those scaffolds to ensure that they're being successful. Another thing that I found really valuable that I've been trying to implement is this idea of, or like sharing with my site, is this idea of a language objective. So we have our content objectives, but really using the academic language and setting that objective for the discussion really kind of has helped guide them. Like, I need you to be able to, reflect about, the water cycle or whatever it's going to be in small groups, so they know, okay, reflection, I know what that means, right? And I know the details about the water cycle. Okay, so this is how we reflect. We've talked about this. And then they now have the equipment to be able to perform the task. And so I just think we need to be explicit, especially in the beginning of inquiry design and inquiry-based learning, because it's not the norm a lot of the time,
Well, and by the time you get to high school kids, this is not stuff that they have been, kindergarten is, I'm just going to say traditionally across the board, kindergarten is by far the most inquiry-driven space probably in any school district, right? Especially when I taught kindergarten eons ago. Like, you would give all this exploration time. It was just amazing. And the way that the kids were just so good at staying on task, even for kindergartners, it was crazy. But you did, even with the littles in kindergarten, you did have to like set those expectations, and you did have to, train them on like, this is how we would do, this space. But it's just in the beginning, right? And I'm so glad you pointed that out, because I think sometimes we go, well, that failed, but we don't think hard about why it failed. Well, did it fail because we didn't do the proper scaffolding? Or did it fail because we didn't know where to strategically insert ourselves to help? Like, there's always all these things that we have to think about, because we do know that this works. It's that, the equifinality. There's so many different ways to do it. And like, for me, one of the hardest parts, and then I'm going to move on to demonstrate. And Steph, someone commented on our Edutopia article, and they said, yeah, make them dig for it. And I thought that was awesome. And I was like, and I'm so sorry whoever said that. I don't remember your handle off the top of my head, but I thought that was awesome, because I do think that's probably one of the hardest things I have to do as an educator, is to know when to step back. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, nope, you don't need you can do this. You don't need me. You can figure this out. So it's that delicate balance of, have I provided enough scaffolding, and can I now step away and say, no, you got this. And to move them into that, no, persevere. It's not about me giving you the answer. You're going to have to work through this. And so I love
responding to questions with a question, in our class. And I often say to my students, I know you're going to get frustrated about that. But part of it is working through it. And then one of the other things I always think about when it comes to kind of setting up a discussion, I often use like music teacher metaphors with my students. And I talk about, especially as somebody when we're teaching writing and reading and discussion and all of these pieces that are happening, that you're like going through a process, that we would never just say to a student on day one with an instrument, write me a song and play it for me, right? You're going to have to learn other people's music. You're going to have to learn some basics and understanding in it. You're going to need to listen to things. You're going to need to follow, right? Like, we just wouldn't expect that they would just like hold it and get it. We might have a few out there that are like the genius, right? But that is few and far between. So just like that, we need to give them those tools so that when they do move into that space, that discussion isn't something that feels sterile. Like I do think that quiet, that like there are moments when quiet is powerful, and then there are moments when quiet will just kill everything. And it, you know, that quiet where it's such a discomfort that they don't know how to move forward. What we want to be able to do is have them have so much to say. That cutting off is the beauty. That is like so beautiful. When Shannon was like, "Oh, I gotta pull you back. We only have 10 more seconds." Right? That's the goal. And so I think as we give them those training wheels. Right. And part of that is the power in knowing, the power in their own voice and in their own understanding. And so hopefully building that piece up, that discovery piece, then allows them to have so much when they move into discuss. So I think like they do build on one another.
Yeah. And I didn't say it before, but I do hope we get to a point with our learners where the discover is not just me giving them content. Like I'm just going to be honest, I'm going to get on my soapbox, and I might have done this before. I don't know. I do it sometimes. If my kids are not learning how to find and validate and effectively use information in school, I mean, I'm going to make sure they do, I'll be honest. But if that's not happening for our kids, we're in so much trouble. And so I'm really trying to challenge myself in that discover is not just me curating content to give to them. I'm going to do that. I'm definitely going to do that. But when they're ready, I want them finding the content for the discovery piece. And so I think that's, and I love how you're saying they're all tying together. I'm going to jump us to demonstrate, which of course is happening all along. And I find that if I don't have it happening, at least from the beginning, it's to some level, and this happens, I've seen this with micro-credentials with adults. If you're not watching the product from the beginning and it gets to the end and it's a disaster, like that's a huge fail. So I like to have little micro accountability pieces along the way, or sometimes it's more of like a process activity where it's like, this part is what they're capturing while they're doing discover. This part is what they're capturing while they're doing discuss. And then this is the reflection part that they're going to do as their final piece to the demonstrate. And so I did it for this slide, which, you know, everything has evolved in the last like 10 months. But I just had a really practical tip about how in the demonstrate, I'm also trying to be really intentional on when is this like team work, when is this individual work, when are they sharing with just me, when are they sharing with each other. And so if you're using Google Classroom or a learning management system, whatever it is, all of those by default, when you call it an assignment, that's a relationship between you and the individual student. The other kids will never get to see it. And that's sometimes what we want, but sometimes that's not what we want. And sometimes we want to actually frame it as this is to use the language that would be in an LMS or would be discussion, actual discussion board, where you could have them post their stuff there and their peers can provide, you know, feedback. And then in Google Classroom, it would just be ask a question and have them link to whatever their product is. But I like to be super intentional about how we can leverage the best of both of those. So I don't know, what do y'all think about the demonstrate piece? Because I don't want it to be like this. And again, this comes from like PBL. Like it shouldn't be this like massive end thing. It's hopefully something we're building along the way.
I think that like synthesis across, you know, a whole like inquiry cycle is really important. Having that kind of, like you talked about, the step-by-step collections, just to ensure that, you know, we're on point. I mean, I feel like so many platforms have made, outside of LMSs, have made this so possible, this whole peer-to-peer engagement. You know, whether it be Google Slides and that real-time collaboration there, Jamboard, you know, you really could. I demoed this morning for my staff whiteboard.chat and really some great pieces there where you can make group boards. I just, Canva, Adobe Spark. I mean, there's so many different aspects where maybe it's not the traditional, like, you know, assignment, but students can even create those elements on their own and share it with amongst peers rather than, you know, teacher always creating it for student to complete. And then I think, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, it goes back to those firm goals, flexible means, like you're saying. Like, it doesn't have to be they all demonstrate in one way. It could be
right. And I think the last piece, and then I'll throw it over to Steph. I think that in this process, this demonstrate process, we really have to think kind of about those reflective practices that exist within, kind of that we building in along the way, because I think that if there are like reflective practices present, then students are going to be much more apt to kind of engage at levels where we need them to engage. And I'm a fan of occasionally throwing in like a reflective practices rubric to get them to like be able to self-monitor, self-regulate. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing in this space to not only contribute to the project, but also contribute with my group? So EdTech's great.
I would agree. I think it supports great practice, right? I think the power of demonstrate it for me and what my students are doing is that I want them consistently demonstrating. I like that idea that like I can't give feedback unless I have consistent demonstration, right? So for me, that process, that demonstration process is happening like consistently throughout. The first time I see something should not be at the end of a project cycle. It should be that we're seeing all the pieces and they're getting tons of feedback throughout. And my hope is that final piece, that final day, if we have it in mind, if it's a performance-based rubric and assessment, is going to be when they're presenting something, but they've received a ton of feedback on it, and they've demonstrated their knowledge in a variety of formats prior to and leading up to that last piece where they're going to be presenting for a panel. That's usually what we do in our pathway. But prior to that, they've written something, they've already talked about something, they've interviewed people, they've then created something, they've done something with it, maybe they've made a documentary, right? They've done a ton of things with it, and then they're sharing, and that reflection that Shannon was bringing up is part of what they bring up in that final presentation, then understanding of their own growth. So that for me is what I hope that students become more keenly aware of, is that they are able to understand where they started and where they are and where they would like to go. And I think if we can do that with them as teachers, if we can then have honest moments of feedback and conversation, if we can start to do more things where students then are leading even in like conferences and teacher pieces and support, right? Then it's student driven, it's student centered, and I am there to support them on their journey. And that demonstration is one moment that allows for a pinpoint of feedback from a variety of people and not just me. That's my hope anyway.
Oh my gosh, I could listen. I want to chat with you guys longer, but I know I'm supposed to keep this around 45 minutes, and I feel like I've already missed that mark, but that's okay. And by the way, I'm going to probably flash through some slides here, so I might say like, look away as I like go through them, but y'all get them. They're all very self-explanatory. The one that I did want to just take a moment on, Steph, we have this in our article. And so this was just me trying to like, how would I do this in station rotations? And if I needed to do it synchronously, let's say, or wanted to do it synchronously. And so this is just, the discover, the discuss, and demonstrate are also same pieces. But I'm saying, well, I'd like the discover to be independent is usually what I want to do, because I want to let them go off and do it at their own pace. And then I want the discuss to happen with me so that I can facilitate that, whether through either it's a level of scaffolding or maybe it's engaging them in deeper conversation because I have a group. If I'm doing it by ability, I might have a group that really needs to be stretched. And then the demonstrate, I'd like them to come back together and kind of have that opportunity to refine and reflect. So on the right, you can just see this is if I was grouping by ability, which I do not want to do all the time because then everyone feels like they've been labeled the bluebirds, and the bluebirds are not the good group. So I'm very strategic about, do I need to actually do this by ability? If I do, I'm going to do it with data. I'm not going to just make assumptions about kids. I'm going to use data to form those groups. But you can see off on the right, that's me moving through the group. So I get a chance with each group, because that's what we do in station rotations. The whole purpose in that rethinking of time and space is, how do I get time with small groups to really engage with them? And so this is just my take on it. this is going to be my, hey, look away, because it's going to get real intense right now, and I don't want anyone to have a seizure. So there's just some slides in here about like how I've sometimes done it with like individual notes, and I usually like to do it with groups. But there's just some background stuff that you all can take. There's not one way to do it. I had a teacher who shared with me, well, like, that sounds great, Lainey, but here's how I do it in my LMS. And I'm like, magic. There's no one way to do it. And then just a quick little PSA about formative assessment, because I get really anxious about a lot of things when it comes to our kids and how we can really like turn them off of learning the way that we do assessment. And so I'll just tell you, in online learning, we've always really advocated for frequent, low stakes, authentic formative assessment. I advocated for it in the traditional in-person, and we want to make that traditional summative. I'm going to get off my soapbox in just a minute, but I'm also just going to put it out there to be really intentional about what we're putting in the grade book, because I've been hearing some stuff going in the grade book. Like, I'm so stressed about kids who have processing issues and getting Kahoot stuff put in the grade book. I'm just going to say it. Okay, I'm done with that. And so that's all I have to say.
Oh, well, you're like, speaking to the part here, but I don't know. In our pathway, like we have 5 grading categories. So they're knowledge and thinking, written communication, oral communication, collaboration, and agency. And oral communication, collaboration, agency, like my big piece that we've talked about a lot in our pathway is that, like, and really all of them, but those 3 especially should be categories that no one ever comes in. No one is ever going to ever be perfect in any of these. And our whole point in education is to help everyone grow. So these 3 categories should only be categories that can lift you up. And so we've talked a great deal about wherever they are and wherever they go, like we should be grading on growth, and everyone should be growing. And so those are the 3 where across the board with English, science, history, that was where we could agree upon that. All right, those are the 3 that are going to be our growth categories. And then like perhaps the other 2 are looking at some content specific pieces. For English, it might be a little bit different, but that for me has helped me. And then when we start to talk about assessment, it feels different when we talk about it in that way.
Yes, I did mention Kahoot. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Yes. Oh. Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I love it. And I will tell you that Kahoot is going to be a game changer for my son, because he lives and dies by gamification. And that's like the best way to engage him. I just don't think it should be used all the time for every kid. And I think some kids, it's a real shutdown. Like, that's just, I'm done. I'm never good at Kahoot. I don't want to play Kahoot. So, I just want to be super intentional with stuff. That's all I care about. I don't want anyone to get turned off of learning. So all sorts of different ways to do it. Equifinality, big thing. And then I know I mentioned this last time, but I'm just praying. Y'all, I'm praying. And yes, Steph, I do have the hand gestures. And by the way, I was on, oh my gosh, I was on something where they froze my face. It was bad. It was really bad. So sorry. It's just, that's me.
I love it so much. Like, I wanted a good meme, a GIF. Like when you did this, it was like this. When you said assess formative, I was like, that is how we all feel inside. It was like the perfect face for it.
Yeah. So well, teachers love feedback. We hate grading. Kids care about grading. We need them to care about feedback. So we got to think about how we're going to make that happen. And I've got ideas for that too, but I know we all do. So at any rate, I'm going to start to wrap it up just saying that I think we're going to come out better on the other side, because I think this is a great opportunity. I think we've seen that this has really kind of mixed it all up, and it's been this disruption that we kind of needed to really rethink things. So I'm excited about that. And with that, I'm going to wonder what I'm going to let that lie. And I'm going to just put this out there that there's the Q&A, because we've had that throughout. But if you need to catch up with me, please feel free to reach out to me by whatever means. That might be kind of bananas that my mobile is just out there for the world, but whatever. I trust people. So I lost my friends. That's okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to wrap it up and just say, if there's anything anyone ever wants to reach out and chat with me about, I'm super easy to find on the web. I'm Lainey Rowell across the web. And to all my friends here, thank you for having me. And I look forward to connecting soon. Thanks, everyone. Oh, wait, I can't hear you, Steph.
Thank you so much for joining us. We wanted to have you on at the end and really let you say bye. So thank you very much for being here, Lainey. We are so grateful to you. As always, you spark great conversation and deep thinking and learning because we are all learners. And I continue to learn from and with you, and I am so grateful. So thank you so much for joining us from all of us here at Global.
Thanks for chatting with me. Thanks, Shannon.